Hello.
Hello.
How are you? This is Wavanya Henderson.
Hey, how are you? Peter Vanstrom. It's actually under my wife's name, but it's Peter.
Okay.
I'm borrowing her computer because I've got something else I got to do on mine later.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So thanks. Hey, well, it gives me a chance to thank you guys for doing such a great job. It's really been amazing for what you've accomplished online here. So thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And with that, I will mute. And I don't know if my video even works, but it doesn't matter. I'm just going to be listening.
Hey, well, welcome everyone. Good evening. I'm still letting some folks in, and we're going to be queuing up a presentation in a moment. I think as everyone knows, we're here to talk about two parts of Roswell this evening. We're looking at doing some detailed planning of the State Route 9 and Holcomb Bridge Road node, and then also the Georgia 400 and Holcomb Bridge Road node. And all of this is part of the ongoing Roswell 2040 comprehensive plan. I know many of you had the opportunity to join us earlier in the day as we went through an initial visioning exercise as we talked about these nodes. But some of you, I think, were only able to join for the evening session. So we're going to do a quick recap of, kind of where we've been and what happened during the lunchtime session. And then we're going to jump into some conversation and some ideas for this evening. So I think that presentation is getting queued up. Apologize for the delay. We had some minor technical difficulties as we were getting started. Oh, there it goes. Great. All right. Well, again, we're here to talk about the State Road 9 and 400 nodes along Holcomb Bridge Road. We really appreciate everyone being with us this evening. We have quite a bit of work to get through in the next couple hours, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I'm going to jump right into it. My name is Eric Lusher. I am the Roswell 2040 Comprehensive Plan Project Manager with the consultant team. We were hired, I work for a company called Pond, and we were hired by the City of Roswell to help conduct this process. A few others from my team on the call that you'll hear from tonight. Andrew Core, you'll be hearing quite a bit from him. He'll be leading us through some facilitated discussion. Then also Jonathan Corona, Lauren Blazik, Lauren Babineau, Michael Cray. And I'm hoping I'm not forgetting anyone because I know we have a lot of folks. I apologize if I did. But either way, there's a lot of folks in Pond here who are going to be either taking notes or just kind of observing and potentially joining in on the conversation. So again, we really appreciate everyone being with us this evening. And if we go to the next slide, we're just going to give you a little bit of context, especially for those of you who this is your first event with us as part of this process. Yeah, so we're kind of doing things a little bit differently tonight than how we originally intended. Our original plan was to take this Thursday night, the previous last Thursday, and then the following Thursday, and take one node each Thursday. Due to the storms and a lot of people not having power and internet and just issues along those lines, we elected to go a little bit longer tonight and then combine the Holcomb Bridge Road, State Road 9, and then the 400 node. So we're going to kind of take each node a little bit separately, but we'll start with this with a recap, and then we'll eventually do some next steps in Q&A. And the goal is to roughly split our time over the next 2 hours between the two nodes. A couple of rules of engagement. Everyone here, we're here because you're interested in Roswell and you want to see Roswell become the best place that it possibly can. But we know we all have different perspectives. So we want everyone to be an advocate for the process, and we want you to bring your perspectives, your different perspectives to this conversation. But we also want everyone to be respectful of each other. So this is all about, vetting ideas and recommendations, making sure that, we're asking and answering some tough questions. You're raising awareness with your neighbors and other people that you know in the community, to make them aware of this process, because this is not the only opportunity to provide input. As a matter of sort of just logistics, it's always difficult in even a normal setting, but certainly on Zoom can be even a little bit more challenging. We want to make sure everyone who wants to speak has the opportunity to speak. So we'll kindly ask that if you've already spoken, please give others the opportunity to speak before you jump in again. And I'll also just advise everyone that we are recording this meeting. We want to make sure that those who weren't able to participate tonight at least have the opportunity to observe how things went. And we'll go to the next slide. So we'll do just a little bit of a recap of the events that have led us to what we're going to be doing this evening. But before we do that, I do want to let everyone know we're going to be using also a separate application called Pigeonhole to really just have sort of a running Q&A platform. It's a little bit easier for us to use than just the chat function. And those of you who've done some events with us already are very familiar with this tool, and it's pretty easy to use. So the way you can do this, it's probably easiest if you're sitting at a desktop to do it on a phone or another device, but you can certainly do it on your desktop as well. But basically, if you go to www.pigeonhole.at and you enter the passcode state route 9 or SR9400, that will get you into this platform where it's just a Q&A mechanism as part of the conversation we'll be doing tonight. And you can also more easily use the QR code if you have a QR reader that you see there on the screen. I'll take you right into it.
Eric, sorry about that. I'm afraid the QR code didn't update, so everybody's going to have to use the URL and the passcode.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, yep. Yeah, I referenced some minor technical difficulties we were having right as we were getting started. Yeah, so unfortunately that QR code will take you not to the place we want you to be. So if you just go to, again, www.pigeonhole.at and enter the passcode SR9400, that'll get you where you need to be. And I'll give everyone another moment or so just to get in there. And basically, we're going to keep coming back to it, but this is a mechanism where if you have questions or ideas, you can type them into this platform. And then likewise, if you see questions or ideas that others have asked and you really want to raise those points, you'll have the opportunity to upvote those points as well. So, to the degree we have a lot of conversation via this app, that gives us sort of a mechanism to prioritize the things that we want to make sure we talk about as well. All right. So as I mentioned, this is part of the broader Roswell 2040 comp plan. So just a little bit of background on that process for those of you who are not familiar with it. It's a process that's required by the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. And the reason we do it is because, well, the DCA requires us to, or we're definitely encouraged to retain our qualified local government and plan first status in Roswell. Those statuses allow the city to, well, legally zone for one thing, but also, basically allows the city to tap into various grants and funding opportunities. And it's really, it's important for that reason, if nothing else. We maintain this status by making sure that we're exceeding the minimum planning standards as part of the process and that we update the plan every 5 years. Oh, looks like we lost the presentation. Oh, and now it's back. So the last plan was adopted in October 2016. So we're right on track for an October 2021 adoption of this current plan that we're doing. And, a big thing in Roswell, a lot of communities, they use this to sort of just check the box. And there's easy ways to check the box. But, Roswell is obviously very, very committed to planning and engaging with its community. So we really use this as an opportunity to make sure that we're updating our ongoing understanding of the city's conditions, which are, always changing. There's always, sort of things happening in the community every few years that just sort of change kind of the pulse of what people are thinking, what's going on. And in that spirit, we want to make sure that we're, finding opportunities to communicate with you, Roswell's residents, business owners, leaders, and make sure that, we're refining the planned future for the community and making sure that it's consistent with the vision that we hear from you. So in that regard, the plan really creates a tool that ensures that future changes are guided by that vision. And it also allows us to make sure that our work, the work in Roswell and the plans for Roswell, makes sense within the region, that it makes sense, relative to our neighbors. And on the next slide, you'll see that we have a 5-step process that kind of guides us through this planning process. We start off with an initial research phase, and right now we're kind of wrapping up the vision phase. These sub-area plans, these detailed looks at these nodes, really the final piece that we need before we can take that research and the vision that we hear from the community to start developing, some real plans and some real ideas that will eventually go into a document in the spring of next year, and eventually, lead us towards that adoption in October of next year. Next slide. All right, so as I've mentioned a couple of times already, as part of the broader effort, we are taking these deeper looks into some specific areas within the community. Tonight we're focusing on Holcomb Bridge Road to State Road 9 and then Holcomb Bridge Road to State Road 400. Next Thursday, we'll be taking at a slightly slower pace, and we're trying to cram all this in tonight. We will be taking a look at the old Alabama Road node just to the east of 400. So for those of you who have not signed up for that yet and are interested in signing up, please make sure to do so. And the way that this overall process works is, we've done a lot already to collect community input. We had a virtual community open house that hopefully a lot of you were able to participate in, where we asked a lot of broad questions about the community. We've also have a stakeholder committee as part of this process with various folks who have been identified by city leaders and other assorted people within the community to really sort of help us, the consultant team, sort of guide this process. So we're getting some more detailed input and advisement from that group as well. But we're using all that to develop a vision. So that image that you see there on the screen, those are actually some notes that we took earlier today as part of our lunchtime session on these two nodes. And that really helps us develop a plan. And ultimately, our goal is to build consensus. We know there's lots of different opinions out there in the community about, well, the community as a whole, but certainly about these specific nodes. And quite frankly, our conversation earlier today, we definitely touched on some very different ideas about what we should and can be doing at these locations. So what we really aim to do here is find where there are areas of consensus, sort of thread that needle, so to speak, and make sure that we're, honoring a vision that makes sense for the community. All right, well, with all that context, I am gonna pass it over to Andrew Core to guide us in some facilitated discussion. I guess real quick before I do that, just want to offer a little bit of a disclaimer about what we're doing. So we are jumping into these nodes. You're about to see some images and things of that nature that we've put together. A lot of this is stuff that we've put together in just the past few hours since our lunchtime session. So, we want to remind everyone that what you're seeing and what we're about to present to you is very much works in progress. And when we put it together, with the express purpose of making sure that we get feedback from you. So I don't want anyone to think that this is the, final outcome of the work that we're doing. This is sort of a midstream point to make sure we're getting some input. It was also put together very quickly, just in the past few hours based on the input we received earlier today. So, there's some details and things of that nature that, may be a little wonky. That's, again, because it's a work in progress. And then I will make one final disclaimer that, the final outcome of this is still a vision, right? So there may be some specific ideas and plans and items that are attached to the sub-area planning that we're doing. But it's just that, it's a plan. We as the consultant team, and certainly City of Roswell, we don't own this land. This is, all these properties are privately owned for the most part. So really what we're trying to do is develop a vision with you, the community, of what you would like to see at these locations, so that if someone were to come in and potentially redevelop them, the city has something that they can take off the shelf and say, look, this is some great work that we did with the community a few years ago, or hopefully maybe shorter than that, but nonetheless some input and ideas that we received from the community, and we would love you, developer, to take these ideas and further elaborate on them in your development proposals. So with that, I will turn it over to Andrew.
Thank you, Eric. Again, I want to thank everyone who participated, generally from also today at the noon lunch. It was very informative and it helps us. A couple of things I want to say about this process. Number one, it is iterative. It means ongoing, it's changing, it's fluid. Number two, the reason we're doing it in this manner is because we can get quick feedback loops. So we can create an idea and test it and see if we're on the right track or if we need to make changes. Secondly, what I want to say is it's high level. Eric reiterated that, so it is very high level. But with that, there are some intended outcomes I generally think are good, achievable goals for something, this kind of process at this high level, looking at a character area within a broader comprehensive plan. I think the first thing is we want to develop a coherent story. So the idea is, and that's a very high level story, but what wants to happen in this particular character area? Secondly, we want to be able to communicate clearly what the scale we want. And we did that scale exercise this afternoon, but I encourage us to say focus on the scale and thinking about what that looks like, not what's going to be in each individual building to a certain degree, or what exactly business or type exact townhome look it's going to be, but a general idea of scale, which can really be able to set a framework. Thirdly, I think from that, from a scale, we talk about clarifying elements, one being development types. This is an exercise we did this afternoon. The second is public space, which we talked about. Public space is critical. It's public infrastructure. And third, the streetscape, okay? What does it look like? What does that public realm look like? Because as Eric said, this is private property. So our goal is to set the framework, set the tone, and then create an initiative and a path forward where we can use public investment and the ideas in the public realm to influence good development and good redevelopment. And finally, I think the way you walk away from this is saying, and I use air quotes in this, what are the public moves? Meaning, what can the City of Roswell do and its partners to make the needed changes to incentivize redevelopment and see the changes you all want to see? So that's really the goal here when we talk about these ideas and what we're trying to work through tonight. So again, based on the community input from the social pinpoint map survey, generally people, as you can see, really wanted to push change in this area. You can see the intensity of the reds and saying, yeah, we really want to see change over here. And we use a dot exercise to really graphically map that. That's good to know. Next slide, please, Lauren. And again, this just reiterates from this afternoon what we heard is that in general, a majority of people really want to see change in this broader community. Just reiterates that with the public survey we did this afternoon at our noon meeting. Next slide. To reiterate this idea of a town center, this is the term community scale I referred to recently. But again, through that idea, really people have landed on this idea of a town center, right? It's not suburban, it's not downtown Atlanta or midtown Atlanta, but it is a town center that has enough intensity and a mix of uses to make it a very vibrant, special place. Next slide. And again, as you can see, over 90% really said, 100% really see this as a town center as being a very appropriate scale that can be very successful in this environment and blend well within the surrounding environment. Next slide. So again, as an overview, opportunities and constraints, you have a major intersection, a major node that's very, very important, State Route 9 Holcomb Bridge. But you have some of these, what we call super blocks, very large blocks with the entertainment facility over there on the right, and Lauren will be kind of my guide there. You have some unique intersection and mobility options, such as how this road is how it connects. There's some lack of connectivity, but you also have some open spaces. You even have a cemetery over here. So you have some heritage and some culture that's really valuable to preserve and to tell that story better. And so our goal is to look at what do we retrofit or what would we remove. And so we went through an exercise as do we kind of do a retrofit idea and work with what we have, or look at something very different. So next slide, please. And so really, in general, when we went through this process of what the look and feel feels like, we got this idea. Kind of this, I'm using the word village, but a mixed-use town center with a small town feel, right? And I think this comes to the idea that you all have a really good downtown Roswell, and so you connect with that, right? But you like that, and you have a brand in that sense, and you like that, and to the degree that we can take key elements from that, but also make it very special and make it very new in this area. That's what we heard. So a development type that has really good architectural materials, an open space that has for the entire family, and streetscapes that are low speed, low volume, that are right sized, that are for all people, not just for cars, is something people are desirable, especially on the interior side, right? So if you go to the next slide, please. And when we asked, what do you want to see? Well, there was a whole range, right? But not surprisingly, people love to socialize. People love to connect with nature, to shop, to have entertainment, which is already existing in some areas there. So this type of kind of very public, space where people are engaging, doing lots of different activities, that was very high on everyone's list. So it allows for a lot of deal flexibility in what goes on here. Next slide. So this is a very high level design concept. We're going to go through kind of different, break it down. But the idea is really looking at that kind of central node area where you focus on State Road 9 and Holcomb Bridge as being that central focal point. And you kind of work your way from there, and you begin building out and making logical sense of the network. So, does the road make sense? Does it move people in the right direction? Do you have a network? As you can see here, we'll talk about this so that the network makes sense. And you have a lot of housing diversity buffered from the corridors by mixed use. So you have a mix of housing types, which is important, but also parks and open spaces with lower volume connections. So meaningful, intentional open spaces. And so this is kind of what we took from what we've heard this afternoon. And it's kind of a first step to kind of play with this idea of that scale concept and how does the scale get ordered correctly. Next slide. So in terms of vehicular circulation, I don't know if there's a second one on this, Lauren, but yeah, if you can go back, thank you. So as you can begin seeing, introducing some cleaner connections. There's actually going to be House Road coming across. There's actually a connection as well. It's not in there. But really creating a hierarchy of roads, a better hierarchy of roads, and then considering this idea of right sizing of streets so they work well for all users is really critical. You go to open space. So we always want meaningful open space, meaning that, when we're talking about, we just don't want to have a pocket of open space that no one uses. Here, there's this idea of kind of a central, almost like a central lawn with adjacent connectivity, but there is some buffering to the adjacent neighborhoods and potentially some connectivity. But this idea is really where people can gather, they do their things, but in a very human scale, right? So then you use the open space in the network to think about the development and how it comes. And so the open space, as you can see, is not on the major road, but it's interior to the character area itself, which will gain greater use and more visibility to the interior, make it more valuable. And then kind of these key nodes. When we think of nodes, they operate in a lot of different, they perform a lot of different functions, right? But I think the important thing is, as you can see, they identify the boundaries of the character area, that you're entering a special place, so that's very important, that you're coming to a key intersection, that this is important, there's meaningful development here, that allows you to transition in and out of different spaces. It allows for opportunities for public art, allows for wayfinding and signage. It allows the ability to link up, likewise, land uses, so they speak to one another well. So that's the beginning point of kind of breaking this down, thinking through this. And of course, the building, the verticality. So we've laid the foundation and now we kind of build it up. As you can see, strengthening those edges and kind of working around that, thinking about that node, and then, focusing on interior spaces, interior parking, and those interior spaces, that's where the parking goes. So the parking's not the thing you see when you drive through, that you have multi-sided development, centered around open space, centered around, interior uses, and it's walkable and very connected. And the buildings, as you can see, are human scale. They're not masses. So they're broken up, but they have different intensities. And again, the land uses in here will be able to flex. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of exactly what's in each building, but the concept you can see is really a mixed-use town center at a reasonable scale, that village-type scale, that you can offer a lot of different options. So these are just beginning ideas of what can take place here. And finally, the parking spaces in those gray areas. Thinking about, when we think about parking, we want to make it work for the development, make it make sense, right? So they're just not parking because you have to meet a code. They're just parking because it makes logical sense to perform the functions intended to perform. And located in places that are not just the face of the community, so that's what you see when you drive up a major corridor, but you actually, things you can actually fit in and actually serve multiple functions. And then these parking spaces, you know, they're major infrastructure costs. So the thought is, can you use them and can they be multifunctional? Can you open them up for events and for festivals? Can you use them and link them to open space? You know, how can you use them in multiple ways? So that's important to consider as well. So here's just some examples of that potential look and feel. Again, I'm going to point out a couple things that I think really can distinguish this particular character area. You're looking at building form and massing. It's very reasonable. It's 2, maybe 3-story. It does have a mix of uses where you might be able to have loft-style living. You can also have potential brownstones in the bottom right-hand corner. But you look at, you know, bottom right, look at the gentleman walking. He feels comfortable walking that space. It feels residential. It's low volume street. It's shade. So there's a clear structure to the street. You have very flexible outdoor spaces, such as the top middle, excuse me. So if you look at the top middle, you have flexible outdoor spaces, commercial uses. Sometimes buildings have 2 frontages. They open on their public space. And I think that's always one of those things we think about, better and more innovative ways to use the street, is especially post-COVID, thinking about how we can flex streets and flex public spaces to generate, you know, economic sustainability and viability. That's really important. And I'll also point to the top left. You look at these kind of streets, you know, they have very special pavement patterns. They slow traffic. They're very identifiable. They even have lighting above the street to kind of create that special ambiance. These are all things that are important, but they're linked to the larger economic success of the area. And that's our goal here. So again, we're going to turn over to questions. So you can type your questions and post them into the pigeonhole.at. And then as they come on the screen, you can also vote for the questions you like and you want to answer. So we'll kind of see what people are really thinking about. So take your moment, let's get a couple minutes to type in those questions, and then we'll be able to answer those shortly.
Hey, everybody, just a reminder, please type in SR9 400. Sorry, we had to set up a new pigeonhole for this meeting and we neglected to change the passcode on this slide. So go to pigeonhole.at and then it is, okay, SR9 400. All right, thank you.
So we see one question out there, and we'll begin answering those in a moment, but we'll let people give it another couple questions and do that. And I'm going to also, you know, I may be answering a couple of these questions. I'll also rely on Eric and others to answer those as well. So we'll just wait till a few more opportunities. And if you see a question you like, vote for it. And if you wrote that question, I'd always vote for my question I wrote. So. So let's go ahead and begin. I want you to select that first question and bring it up regarding the Montreal, Canada.
Yeah, and Andrew, I think I can try to answer this a
Yeah.
little bit. So with the disclaimer that we meet myself and some of the other folks on tonight, we're not with the city. So with that disclaimer, I will mention that we were fortunate enough. My team was fortunate enough to also be involved with the city's bicycle and pedestrian master plan, which was completed last year. So I don't want to speak for Roswell DOT or for the city in saying this, but broadly speaking, the city's philosophy, as I understand it, up to this point has been to do what they can. So there's lots of roadways where there's a little bit of extra space. Let's do what we can to make that sort of a bicycle shoulder, or in some cases where there's even a little bit more width, a bike lane. Now, having said that, as part of the bicycle and pedestrian master plan, some of the work that we did, and I think certainly the direction the city wants to go into, is to make a very specific sort of investment in a bike system that is much more separated from the roadway. So as part of that plan, there's a broader what's referred to as a hub and spoke system that identifies some key corridors where most of those corridors, we're trying to serve both bicyclists and pedestrians. But when we're serving the bicyclists, we're very often trying to serve them through multi-use paths, which basically remove the bicyclist from the roadway. There's not 100% consensus on that, admittedly, in the sense that a lot of the sort of 1% riders, as we call them, the folks who like to go out there and really ride their bike to get around, whether it's for recreational or other purposes, many of them do feel more comfortable on the roadway. But that is, through some of the engagement that was done as part of that process, and just thinking about what's appropriate from an investment standpoint of view, there is a broader system plan for the city that is going to be much more multi-use path oriented. As it relates to this particular node, there are some there is sort of a multi-use path identified for Commerce Parkway, which kind of rings the northeast edge of the location that we're looking at. And hopefully that answers the question. I'm certainly happy to elaborate more if the person posing the question was thinking something a little bit different than how I'm interpreting it.
Yeah, Eric, I'll add to that when we think about new, this is a phased process. So you're retrofitting these different areas. And so I think as we think about what we want to see happen in this character area, that's part of what we talked about is mobility. So, to the degree, and successful mobility means for multiple users. Can you walk safely to different places? Can you bike safely? And so all those are part and parcel of what the overall, especially with interior to this character area, making those connections possible. So yeah, I don't think it's that we're not looking at those and thinking about that, but I think as you mentioned, there's a number of different communities, including Montreal and others in North America, that have made those significant investments. And I think again, this is a starting point, a starting process to think about as this gets redeveloped, what does it look like to create a system for all users? So, well, if you can go ahead and click that as the answer and go to the next one, and I'll bring it back to the broad screen. Oh, there's lots of them. This is great. All right, so yeah, how can the city fund such redevelopment? My first comment would be, it's private land, right? So, but the first thing you can do is look at public infrastructure. How do you improve roads and streetscapes? Making sure that that's important. Your public infrastructure, and there's a whole host of other things to do to incentivize that. I don't know, Eric, if you want to add anything to that. There's a lot of tools in the toolkit.
Yeah, I think broadly, to clarify a little bit, our main focus with this exercise is to identify what redevelopment could look like. A sort of secondary component of the exercise is, where appropriate and applicable, is to, as Andrew's mentioning, identify any types of public investments that could help encourage such redevelopment, right? So those are sort of two separate things. I think there's sort of a third thing that is posed by this question, and I'm opining a little bit in saying this, but the broader question of how can the city help fund such redevelopment lends itself to, does the city want to fund such redevelopment? And I think that's a broader question that, certainly myself as not representing the city in an official capacity, what would be appropriate to answer. I think that that's a broader conversation that, this exercise and this comprehensive plan can start to delve into, but that's a much bigger question that, eventually lends itself to, the financing associated with redevelopment, what the appetite is within the community, and fundamentally what is the appetite, with city council to potentially make those types of investments. Redevelopment is not easy. Redevelopment is very challenging. There's a lot of risk associated with redevelopment. So, one thing that we all need to keep in mind, whether it's the city or if it's privately owned or privately developed, or even if it's a public-private partnership, is redevelopment is a risky proposition. So, there's a lot of things that go into it that whoever's making those investments, they're going to want to do as much as they can to make sure that they can, see the return on those investments.
Thank you, Eric. Let's do the next one there at the top left. I think this will be an easier one to respond. When we talk about civic use, we're talking about, city government, state government, that type of use. So when we talk about civic, it's not civic park space, which is, public park. It's really more civic use in terms of government buildings, government complexes, those types of things, as we define it in this survey.
Yeah. I will suggest we could probably expand that a little bit. And I'm not suggesting that, this is appropriate here, because we know there's a library right down the road, but I would consider something like a library a civic use also. Or a community center. So civic use, yes, it's a building or a function that is, fundamentally government related, but it can have, the intention is, fundamentally for it to be, public oriented, public use. So it could also be, just another example could be, a city owned or it doesn't even have to be city owned, but like, let's say an amphitheater or a, like an outdoor concert or theater or something like that. That's kind of expanding the boundaries a little bit beyond, sort of the explicit definition of civic, but the idea of civic use would be something that is for the community and used by the community as a whole.
Or even a farmer's market.
Yes. And the cemetery is a good civic use. It's already existing, as Denise points out. So great point. A cultural resource of some kind. Lauren, let's go back to the screen. Thank you. Based on this morning's feedback, will the proposed vision emphasize that we desire more businesses, restaurants, entertainment employers, and green space than residential?
Read that again.
That's an interesting question. It's a blend. It's certainly, what I would say is it's got to have a healthy mix to make it, not to overuse the term work and play, but the idea that if it's just businesses and commercial and it's not very livable, you still have to drive there. So the idea that to the degree it makes sense, and to the degree that, as a developer comes in and looks at that, and looks at the data, that makes sense. Yeah, I think there's a healthy mix is always more appropriate. Now, sometimes it's going to lean one way or towards the other, and especially the town center, you're going to have a lot of different uses and a lot of retail storefront. But the goal is to have a diversity. Want to go to the next question?
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that, Andrew, that, the market is going to obviously have a lot to do with if someone were to come in and redevelop that, there'd have to be a little bit more, a lot of more data gathering and things like that to see what would actually work from a redevelopment standpoint, from the market standpoint.
Absolutely.
I think, just as sort of a clarification also with that question, how we asked it and posed it this morning, we use that, obviously there were some uses and functions that were obviously more desired than others. So we can use that to sort of understand, what a desired balance would be. As Lauren just mentioned, that does have to be sort of reconciled with market realities. But the other side is that we ask that question to, understand what potential uses are just flat out not appropriate. So even though we're seeing, potentially less interest in the residential side compared to the more business side, through that response, that doesn't we don't necessarily interpret that as, well, that means we have more business than residential. It's more about there's still interest in residential. It just may be a little bit less.
Eric, I think you'd be good.
Yeah, I can try to take this one. So again, with the disclaimer I made a couple of moments ago that, we're not with the city, and we're, we certainly don't want to represent Roswell DOT. Yes, we know the original plan for Big Creek Parkway was to be a little bit more extensive and connect all the way over. I can't speak to all the discussions and analysis that led us into, where it basically tees into, I guess, into Wausau. But, I think a lot of that really came down to, broadly speaking, and I hope I'm speculating here a little bit. But, I think a lot of that came down to, cost and right away and just, not wanting to displace, entire neighborhoods. So, with that in mind, I think, I don't think there's anything with this vision that would not, it wouldn't preclude that as a possibility. So if these locations were to redevelop and, we were to see, some additional redevelopment outside of the area we're focusing on right now, that would extend kind of southward along Holcomb Bridge Road, this certainly does leave open the possibility as if those properties and areas were to redevelop, that we could see, potential extension of the Big Creek Parkway all the way over this way. I mean, from a transportation point of view, and from a circulation point of view, that's something we would broadly advocate for. But a lot of this, like I said earlier, or as we've said several times actually, this is all private land we're talking about here. So right now there's not a public function to make that an improvement or a recommendation. But if private development were to come along, it could certainly work around that idea.
Hey, Eric, can you hear me? It's Jackie.
Yes, Jackie. Yep, we can hear you.
So, okay, related to that question that someone just asked related to the Big Creek Parkway. So if they want to talk about that, Rob Del Ross, the Deputy Director of Transportation, can help them out. However, I do know that some of that property that the road was going to go through is wetlands. So there were some issues that they had related to that. So it changed a little bit because of those, because of that reason. So, but if you have specific questions, you can talk to Rob Del Ross in Transportation and get the information from him related to how the road came about that direction. Secondly, the question related to the bicycle master plan and everything that you talked about the first, I think it was the first question. Dave Cox is the representative from Transportation who works with the bike plan and everything. So if you have specific questions related to that, I do know that they just did a text amendment into the UDC to assist with the bike ped plan, so that when someone comes in to develop on those areas with the hub and spoke, as Eric indicated, that will be something that they'll trigger that, and someone would have to put that type of would have to include that in their plan. So, but if you have more questions related to that, you could talk to Dave Cox in Transportation. Thanks.
All right, Lauren, next question, if you can bring it up on the board. I think we answered that other one. Let's go to the 2 to 3 story. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great comment. Part of this strategy of coming up with a vision, I'll just say, is to then, that triggers the need to align the various codes and development regulations so the vision and that we all create collectively aligns up. So that's a great comment that we'll certainly consider and factor in. Eric, I know you worked on some of the mobility options. Maybe you can answer this question better than I can.
Yeah, I mean, I
So-
think, whenever, I mean, just broadly speaking, whenever we're talking about, public investment, if that's kind of the direction that things would potentially go into in terms of, mobility options, obviously where the city already owns property or where, there's, less right of way or displacement impacts, or as Jackie mentioned earlier, which I had forgotten, environmental impacts are always important as well. Generally path of least resistance is going to be taken. But, I think, to get to kind of the heart of this question, what we're really trying to do here is lay out a broader redevelopment vision and then let the mobility piece sort of kind of tag along with that to help support that redevelopment vision. So, I guess I'll interpret this question as more of a statement that this is something that we should, potentially look into as an idea to pull into the vision. I think we've still got, yeah.
So what transportation changes would be needed to remove the medians at the 4-lane approaches 91492 intersection? It makes the parcel corners very difficult to access. Again, those are certainly, I think, when we talk about right sizing the road and looking at how the road functions better, we're starting to get into more and more of the details. Those are something we can certainly look at. But again, I think the broader idea is to make the operations of the road work better. So it's something to keep in mind. But again, I think we have to be careful to keep it at a very high level. Not to say we don't want to dodge this question and deal with it, but it is a state route, multiple state routes, and so we have to think it through about how traffic operations work. But to the degree this area gets redeveloped, developers will have a hand in making traffic operations improved. That would be the goal.
Yeah, Andrew, I would chime in. Sorry, this is Michael. That would take a lot of coordination with Georgia DOT.
Yeah. Yeah,
they're the
big.
ones.
Yeah, I will add, I mean, just generally, Georgia DOT is very protective of access. And if there's already a median in place, generally that's sort of the preferred access management tool. Where I think we potentially, get around that with the work that we're doing. Again, we're keeping it very high level, as Andrew mentioned. But, and making sure that we're providing access to the various corners of this node. It's about those new connections, right? So, there are rules for spacing in terms of intersections and driveways and median breaks and things of that nature that GDOT has. So, that'll all get worked into any type of actual redevelopment that happens. But as some of the images that we showed you before, we're proposing more cross connectivity, more opportunities for there to be quasi-public roadways that can be used to help with the internal circulation, which will help with the access.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. So Lauren, next question. Yeah, I think that's just a visibility thing. That was really meant, the red dot was really meant to be a node as a key area, a key part of the open green space, as an opportunity, as a kind of a gateway into that part of the site. That's really all that represents. What goes in that red dot, what happens to that node is a to be determined. But the goal is that it's a significant kind of opening view shed entrance point. So great question, thank you. Eric and Michael, or Michael, you guys want to answer this question?
Would the person who posed this question mind elaborating on what they mean by the expansion of Walsall Road? Just want to make sure we're understanding the intent of the question.
And if you want, you could put that in the chat box.
Yeah. I guess offhand, again, with the disclaimer that, we're not Roswell DOT. And as Jackie mentioned, ultimately, if you have questions with, that are transportation related, it's probably best to talk to Rob Del Ross or Dave Cox if it's specifically a bicycle or pedestrian issue. I'm offhand not familiar with any expansion of Walsall Road. If you're referring to like any type of widening project, there may be some intersection improvements that are being contemplated. So that's why we just asked for some elaboration so we can sort of understand what's being thought of here. All right, well, we can come back to that if there's some more elaboration.
If so.
Well, there was the comment is, why are they expanding it? Walsall Road.
Sure.
Yeah.
If the question is why, yeah, well, like I said earlier, I'm not admittedly offhand familiar with any plans. So any plans that are out there, I would be it'd be inappropriate for me to comment on or whatnot. I think along the lines of what Jackie mentioned earlier, if you have questions about Walsall Road or any plans along there, you're probably best reaching out to Roswell DOT directly. Rob Del Ross, the assistant director, can certainly try to help you.
So this next question is about incentives. And again, this is just back to our other comment. Yeah, there's a series of tools in the toolkit that can assist. And some of these are great comments. And so I think it's all part and parcel of thinking about, once the vision is set, how does this seed that's been planted in the comprehensive plan become a reality?
And I'm just going to chime in. It's 6:54. So we do want to make sure we spend some time on the next node, which I sort of anticipate is going to have a little bit more conversation. Now, we did take a couple of minutes earlier in this hour just to kind of give you some context. So I'll suggest at 7 o'clock, wherever we are in answering these questions, we'll move on.
Yeah.
But if we don't get to a question that's been asked, we certainly have a record of it, and we'll make sure to reach out to everyone who signed up for this with a response and some ideas.
Great question. From a mobility standpoint, we talk a lot about streetscapes, and this is coming up in the next conversation as well. But City of Roswell and Holcomb Bridge, really making that those truly special corridors, and changing the mindset. Yeah, they move a lot of people every day, but for that reason, because they move a lot of people every day, they really need to shine well, especially from a streetscape perspective. And that's as important as making it a gateway to both parts of Roswell, but also for the development itself. There's also some, I think to the degree you can, looking at House Road and how that makes sense, and then working closely with the developer to see what you can do in terms of redefining, how this ever shapes up long term, working internally to make those areas, work and function better. So I don't know if Eric or Michael have any other recommended improvements, but that's something we heard loud and clear, and something we understand as well. And we are very sensitive to that idea that from the streetscape perspective.
Yeah, I'll just add one other thing, which is, and we didn't show it on a slide just now, but we did show it earlier in the lunchtime session for those of you who are part of that. One of our ideas here is not necessarily just to say what transportation improvements are needed to achieve this vision, but what transportation improvements are already planned that we can leverage a little bit. You know, the bicycle pedestrian master plan that we mentioned earlier, there are a series of recommendations that come through this area, such as the multi-use path on Commerce. There's also some roadway improvements that are in the mix. Not anything that's going to happen next year, but there are plans for potentially extending Mansell Road south of Holcomb Bridge Road so that it loops back to State Route 9, and then likewise extending Commerce Parkway beyond Old Roswell Road where it tees in now, so that it connects directly into Holcomb Bridge Road. So those are things that we sort of reflected in our grid patterns that we showed you on the vision earlier. That definitely would help with circulation. I think we have this one kind of in the top middle. We went through the one in the top left already. The one in the top middle, too much emphasis on bikes, not enough emphasis on wide walkable streets and streetscapes. I think that the primary reason we're talking about bikes is primarily because it came up in an earlier question. But I think, you know, with some of the imagery we have, and certainly our understanding is that, you know, we really want to make sure, and Andrew can speak to this much more elegantly than I can, but, you know, we understand sort of the street as a place, and what that means, especially from a pedestrian experience, and what that means in terms of wide walkable sidewalks. Andrew,
Yeah.
do you have anything you could add to give
Yeah,
a much better
talked
answer
about-
than I just attempted?
Well, yeah, I think the reality is when you talk about the pedestrian experience and streetscape sidewalks, it's a complete package. It's not just 5 or 6 feet of concrete. Okay, it's more than that. It's a defining edge in terms of, you know, separating from, especially let's say a very busy road. What does the edge look like? Is it buffered because it's a very busy road? Does it feel very connected to a low volume road? But that's part of that story, that buffer. It's the width of the street and the width of sidewalks vary based on the comfort level and scale. The materials used in there, long-term materials that are not, I think you want to use high quality materials that also instill a sense of space into the character of the area. So that's part of the experience. It's wayfinding where you're going. It's you know, one of my things that I always get, I always challenge is putting benches in logical locations so that they're very useful, not simply just dropping them every 50 feet, but actually making places where people can stop and sit, communicate with one another. How does it feel to cross the street? Is it safe? Is it visible? And then also on the back side of the sidewalk, what does it look like? What is it connected? How does it interface with the building frontage? And that's really critical, right? Do you have a railing? You're looking over a steep edge. Are you on a building? Is there a retail component of that you're engaging with different people? There's a number of things that go into that 20, 30 feet, or maybe less, even small spaces that you can do, you know, the devil's in the details. And so that's really important to keep in mind. And so we very much highly value that. So I think the comment is well taken and something we've been emphasizing and will continue to emphasize as part of these character areas. So thank you.
There's one that I think we'll wait until the next, because it's more about the Georgia 400 node, but there's one more that I wanted to get to about the viability of cottage courts.
I think it goes to the broader picture of diversity of housing types and uses. And ultimately, you know, that's something we've talked about to, you know, not just make it a drive-to development. You have to drive to and leave, but something that kind of hits a variety of different user types. Ultimately, it's going to be, you know, it's going to be ultimately the final developer, what happens there. But a range of, you know, I use this term this morning. I like that term, the 8 to 80, meaning do you have a variety of people, age groups, families, younger children? Can they succeed in this area? Do you have people with families, single people? Do you have people who can age in place? And can they be successful and get to goods and services, not have to get in the car and drive? So these are all the elements and tools to think about. So would it be viable? Possibly, but it would have to be looked at in very great detail. It's also economic driven as well. So.
Okay. Do you all want to move on to the next node?
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
let's
7
move on
o'clock.
to the next node. We know there'll be a lot of conversation about that as well.
Yeah. Okay. And we will get to these 2 questions later. Okay. Just going to leave them up there.
We're going to shift, and as I mentioned, the idea is, to think about. I'll just reiterate: what's the coherent story we're telling? Does the scale align with the community value and what you want? And once you define that scale, the idea of clarifying elements, meaning development types, public space, and streetscapes. And finally, what we want to talk about: what are those public moves we can make? And we had a lot of great discussion this afternoon, and I appreciate everyone's feedback because it really helped clarify things. And so this is kind of the tale of one character area, right? 2 different things are happening here. Obviously, you can see there's a lot of desire for change at the intersection. It's a highly visible corridor, huge opportunity from a commercial and just visibility standpoint for the city. But it's also got this equal kind of the other side of the coin is it has a very wonderful greenway and watershed with Big Creek Greenway. And so we have to think about those 2 things and balance. So what we develop here is the vision is a balance between both and how they can successfully sync together. So next slide. Again, not surprisingly, majority of people felt like it was important to see the change and see this development pattern take place. What a lot of people said is, and we heard this today very loud and clear, is, what is that scale between town center and urban development? How do we strike a right balance between the 2? And so I think, again, what does that mean, especially in the areas around 400 and Halcombe Bridge? Next slide. And again, this was reiterated today that people agree with what was shown and what was collected from Social Pinpoint. So ultimately, we got to kind of look and feel results. And so this idea, and I think this is going to during additional conversation because it certainly did. But how do you create kind of development for a variety of uses? This is some of what we heard before. Open spaces for a broader community, and then when we think about residential and streetscape, you have certainly external streetscapes, but also public spaces to share amongst one another. That's vibrant, and we said town center, but really it's a gateway node, a gateway community. And we want to think about this. I'll be very clear. We're going to be dealing with the other catty corner intersection next week, so we don't want to work in a vacuum. We want to think about this holistically, as how they all connect together. But this is a starting point. As you might suspect, similar to the other one, lots of ideas for what people would like to see here, ranging from restaurants all the way to quote civic uses, a variety of different options here. In terms of the design concept, so one of the things we heard, is to say we really want to take advantage of the intersections that come off. What can be done here now? And so here's the balancing act we're trying to find. First and foremost, ultimately, the idea of what's the theme and story here? Is there an opportunity? And we heard the word campus. The opportunity to look at not just corporate office, because that means everything closes up at 5 p.m., but an emphasis on something that's very distinctive to this corridor to draw different types of users, whether it's IT, is it a corporate headquarters for someone? Could it be something that's, medical supplies, things like that? Is it even something where there's a lot of innovative uses where you come in and have small laboratories and do things and younger professionals who want to do that type of work, okay? So the reality is we heard a lot of that, and certainly we think that has validity to the degree that it's not strictly an office park that dies at 5 p.m., right? We got to make it, what does it make it viable to work year round, and what makes it flexible enough The word eco-district or innovation district is often overused, but I think that gives you, plants a seed in your brain. That could be something here because of its just connection to 400, connection to Holcomb Bridge, its visibility. But the real attraction also is the Big Creek Greenway and the opportunity that there is new, the Big Creek Parkway is coming through here as well. That helps establish the footprint through here. And so we play with this idea of a blend of different uses and different housing types. So what you see on the screen is still very blocky, but it gives the sense that, yeah, you can do something like that and really take advantage of its visibility. So I want to be clear on that. And then focus on, I'd say, higher intensity, especially along that street frontage that is Holcomb Bridge. And then drawing people in to make it a truly district-wide space, but not another town center just down the way, right? So it's got to have some of its own distinctive qualities. And that's the goal here, and that's the balancing act we're trying to find. But it is very different because it does have the Big Creek Greenway, a Big Creek, and the potential for the Greenway. So we'll go to the next slide. So big key theme, conservation. You have an area of land that's a heavily wetland. It's got a creek, but you have access to nature. So this helps define, if you look at this, nothing else, take away, you have two kind of defined sets of this character, south and east, north and west. Next slide. You begin having the vehicular circulation in gray. Obviously you have the parkway that's planned, but we begin looking at, well, how does this make logical sense? How do we begin a hierarchy of streets that can move both local traffic and traffic moving through the site? You're creating redundancy when you see this, meaning there's more options for people to move through the space and also interior. So this creates the need and opportunity to create a hierarchy of streets so they're not all look the same. And also further enhances the need to really enhance Holcomb Bridge, because that's going to be one of the key visual connections between both sides of the intersection. How do we make that work well? And that's a very difficult question, but something we want to explore. The trails. Obviously with Big Creek Parkway, there are bicycle and pedestrian amenities on the parkway, so that builds it out. But there's also a real opportunity to continue and build out at least a segment of the greenway within this space, right? So imagine having the ability, if you're working here, within a quarter mile to get on the greenway and get access to health, access to trails. It's really going to be a public health benefit in this area, and it's going to be a major draw for both employers, employees, and potential residents. When we talk about building footprint, I want to, you begin kind of putting in, kind of blocking out areas that could be developed, right? Again, getting away from super blocks, creating manageable spaces that are human scale, but increasing that intensity, especially on the interchange along Holcomb Bridge, right? That frames it for you, that core, right? That, as Lauren is showing with her cursor, but then to the interior, it takes on a different scale. And again, you have to consider, as we think about this, and any developer will, the topographic changes and what the relationship is from the buildings, whether they're residential or commercial, to the greenway. It's a real advantage. So how do you take advantage of those view sheds and the visibility and the connectivity? And green space. I always want to say intentional green space. In this, what you have happening is you have a series of different green spaces, all functioning, having a slightly different use. Okay, so that one up at the top where the cursor is now, this could be a potential area for, maybe it's residential, it's broken up, maybe it's townhomes, smaller, or again, don't think of the block as a building. It could be a block if it be broken up, but smaller, maybe residential spaces around that area because it backs up to residential anyway. So now you have the opportunity to kind of introduce that. It's far enough away from the larger, dense, intense, larger buildings, but you're still very walkable and you can connect. And you have a central green space for them. If you go to the west at the corner, you've got this. So this really is a central space. And so this is a central gathering space that directly looks out. So potentially it could be an amphitheater, it could look out towards Big Creek Greenway, creates a number of different opportunities. Are there some civic uses in that corridor that are the transition from residential at the north to more of the kind of commercial and larger kind of innovation district to the south, for lack of a better word, to the east. And then you have some interior green spaces, which is a unifying feature that links both sides of the parkway, which is important. And up to the right, top right, whether it's residential or other uses, you have that as a central green space that functions as maybe this is playgrounds, active play. If they're residential, maybe it's simply an access, has a different use. So they all have intentionality, and they all function and serve different groups of people, but they can be linked, and their linkages is through the greenway itself and through the road network. And it's a little bit different there. You can kind of see some of these little pink nodes, but different areas. And again, nodes are areas of activity where different things are coming together, whether it's key intersections, whether it's visibility, access off the parkway. These are all key areas, maybe access into the site, that are opportunities to do something, opportunities for wayfinding, for signage. And of course, you have the intersection too, that strong corner. But bringing people in, introducing public arts, there's something special happening here. It's a transition of space, of uses. All these things are happening at these nodes. So we want to think about nodes of intentionality. All right, we're to the questions. So, and you have this kind of look and feel. So these are some of those.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So here's a potential look and feel. Again, there's also this idea that, and we talked about this, introducing also this campus look and feel as well. How do we make that makes it a transition so it doesn't feel so intensely office park, but has a blend? Where are you going to go at lunch? Where can you live in a townhome within a quarter-mile walking distance? Are there condominiums above retail that you can stay? So you're appealing to a wider variety of users, including the people who are working there. And that's the draw, right? People, that's what's going to make some of this very successful and take advantage of the visibility and the traffic on Holcomb Bridge. The next slide, Lon, thank you. Okay, now we're to the questions. The question is, with the Georgia 400 Holcomb Bridge Road node being defined as the highest economic benefit to the city, how should we be defining the intent of this node to accomplish the unfolding vision? Any thoughts at this point? Well, I think it requires extra care and extra thought, right? And I will say that node on both sides of the interstate are important. So they need to be symbiotic and speak to one another. I don't have a clear answer yet. That's why we're going through this process, but I think we want to be able to really take advantage of this and make sure it works right. I think space that's designed that is very flexible, and so I think that's important to consider as well. So I think we want to think about that, but it's still something we still need to dive into and think about further. That's really part of the broader conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I'll opine that, I think it's less important what we as the planning team think about this, and really more, what you, the community, thinks about in terms of this node and how you answer this question. So we would love to hear from any of you if you have some thoughts on this. I know we had some earlier conversation about this and definitely had some distinct opinions, but I think this is sort of the fundamental question when we're looking at this node. What is the intent? What are we trying to do here? And what does this node mean to Roswell, and how do we best leverage it?
This is Trent Perry. I added some comment earlier today. I'm sorry to be redundant, but having lived on the east side for 33 years, I've seen this issue for many years. If you read through all of the major economic studies that the city of Roswell has commissioned in the last 15 years, almost every one of them focuses on the Holcomb Bridge interchange as the most underutilized area of Roswell in terms of economic development opportunity. And it also defines it as opportunity lost. But yet there's always been the lack of will to do the proper planning and make the right kind of investments and partner with all the landlords and or property owners and businesses in order to make this a vibrant intersection, as with most of the other areas on 400. And I think that this particular concept that you just outlined utilizes the economic growth potential at the expense of the Roswell economy. And I'll let everybody else talk from here.
Well, Warren, let's go to the next question. See if there's additional questions. So I'll make sure there are any others. I'm sure there'll be similar points to this.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I can answer this question. So at least with what we're discussing tonight, we're looking at just the northwest quadrant. But as Andrew mentioned, we will be looking at not right on 400, but we will be looking at areas that are a little bit more centered along Old Alabama. We could actually we do have a slide in here earlier in the presentation that shows the boundaries of what we'll be talking about next Thursday night. So, we know this node and that node, and arguably even the other node that we were talking about earlier at State Road 9, we don't want these to act in a vacuum, right? They all work together. So I think certainly when we're looking at the node at Old Alabama next week, and we're thinking about what happens on the east side of this interchange, certainly the new, the access across 400 for the express lanes, that really opens up some possibilities in the same way that Big Creek Parkway opens up some possibilities here on the west side and the north side of the interchange. Yeah, so I'll just.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that, that's something that is in the bicycle and pedestrian master plan. Something that's far out. That's not going to happen tomorrow, unfortunately, just because that's quite the project, and there's a lot of challenges to making it happen. But that's absolutely the vision within that plan, and then we're carrying that forward through this work here as well.
This is Denise. One thing I was going to say is that we're only looking at one side of this node for right now. And I do think because so much of it is actually protected wetlands, that this side actually does present some interesting, so it may have some limitations, but also some interesting possibilities. I mean, I kind of really like the feel of the big walkway and how you've introduced some types of residential as it's pushing up against the next character area. So, but I just want to look at this. We shouldn't really just look at this in a vacuum, because next week we'll pick up on the other side, which of course will be connected. Thanks.
Yeah, Denise, you make a great point. You can't just build two individual developments and not consider their relationship. In fact, they should be working together long term. They build off one another's success. So that would be the goal, ultimately, to the degree we can.
That's a great question about MARTA. Why don't we jump into that one real quick, just because it popped up on the screen a second ago here. Yeah, so that's something we haven't really talked about, but it's definitely a potential game changer as it relates to this node, which is that the potential of a future North Line extension from North Springs through Roswell and into Alpharetta and points beyond, sort of changes the conversation. So you know, the extension of the North Line has been studied by MARTA. It's in sort of various states of progress in terms of study. But, you know, broadly speaking, you know, the expectation is if the North Line were to extend, there would be a station somewhere in the vicinity of Holcomb Bridge Road. So, you know, I think that's definitely something, because there's a lot of specifics there that we could really only speculate on. You know, we don't want to say here's the location for the station necessarily, but we want to make sure that, you know, the work here on this node, and likewise the work that we'll be looking at next week at Old Alabama, you know, have enough sort of capacity to incorporate, you know, and you know, aren't you know, have the contingency in place so that, you know, wherever that station would potentially be, and if that were to happen, that it's you know, it works in a synergistic way with the possibilities that heavy rail connection would make.
Eric, you want to handle this one? I think that's a good comment. Make sure we think about that, keeping those other studies and plans in mind.
Yeah, Scott, would you mind elaborating on the connectivity you're referring to?
Yeah, there's been plans now and then that show connecting the northwest quadrant to Mounsell Road through Duke Drive, I think it is, around by the Lowe's. Looking for different routes to get there. I think a couple of the Big Creek Parkway early plans showed that. Obviously, that was in a lot of flux, and we ended up with what we did, but that would definitely change things as far as people to be able to get to other parts of Roswell.
Certainly, yeah. I think you know, just kind of big picture. I think, you know, the big challenge there, as it ended up being a little bit with Big Creek Parkway, is, well, the Big Creek itself. Just getting across there in a way that is, you know, environmentally appropriate and also not tremendously expensive. But that's something we can look into a little bit more and you know, understand a little bit better as we continue to refine this plan to see if there's opportunity there that's worth incorporating.
Yeah, just saying, let's keep it on the radar.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, so the question is about crime and being high in this area and why there hasn't been redevelopment. So again, I think it's I don't know if that plays directly into it, but it's certainly the goal, I think, of this is to showcase the comprehensive plan, the value the site has, and the redevelopment potential of the site. So I think it's matured over a long time. Obviously, we know anecdotally has a lot of crime. I believe that's true from the statistics. It's very high. So I think all the more reason to have some attention paid to this to see what can work well here. So.
Yeah, and I'll just add, you know, to Trent's point earlier, you know, that this is really a very highly visible site. So despite, you know, some challenges with crime that, you know, are arguably related to some of the existing uses there, you know, this is a location that, you know, with the right ingredients, you know, is definitely primed for redevelopment and for new vision, which is, you know, quite frankly, why we're looking at it.
So the question is, you know, where are there other precedent examples of this? And that's a great question. You know, I would have to do some thinking about that. This exact unique scale. what could take place. I don't have one off the top of my head that comes to my mind. I have this blend of uses as well as kind of the added introduction of a creek as part of that. I think that's something we can, I think, consider, especially as we think about the vision and kind of building this out and kind of telling the story, thinking about that to communicate that as precedent. I'm sorry to blank. I don't have a good one off the top of my head. To do a little more research. I have a couple of places I may look, but it's a very unique site.
Yeah, I'll just add, more broadly, not necessarily to the specifics of what we're suggesting here, but I'm interpreting this question to be a little bit concerned about, say Holcomb Bridge Road, or if we're talking about the other node, also it's State Road 9. These major state highways that have, like in the case of Holcomb Bridge Road has, something like 80,000 vehicles a day, and it's very, very wide. Right this section of Holcomb Bridge Road, it's I believe it's 8 lanes wide, turn lanes, and there's a lot going on. Then you think about, well, how do you place a human scale building on that? And there is, admittedly a sort of context sensitivity there that we need to be, cognizant of. But broadly speaking, I think one of the things that we're trying to put into these plans is that, to the degree we get into what uses go and what part of these sites, we want to make sure that the uses that are more residential oriented, are buffered from those major corridors, so they're not impacted, and it's not a drawdown in quality of life for those residents. And then likewise that, commercial and retail gets the visibility it needs. And, despite the fact that, right now we'll have to think a little bit about a specific example that kind of speaks to the specificity of what we're talking about here, that there are lots of broad examples of buildings that are human scaled that are on transportation corridors that are very wide and very busy. And that's, throughout the world you can see that, but even in the United States, it's something we don't have a lot of great examples of here in Atlanta. We arguably don't really have any good examples here in the Atlanta region, but certainly in some of the your older communities, particularly ones that were built out, say prior to like the 1950s or so. So if you go to the Northeast and even the Midwest, there's certainly locations where you'll see a major roadway that is potentially 6 lanes wide. And there's, some intense buildings with storefronts right on the road. Again, it's not a model that we have a lot of here in Atlanta, but it's a model that works and is successful in other locations.
Hey, Eric.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to call out one example that may be pretty comparable if anybody is able to drive to it. I don't know if anybody's been to the Highlands of West Village in Smyrna, but it's off of Atlanta Road, the corner of Atlanta Road and I-285. But they deal with a similar issue, and they're able to contain this node while featuring some pretty town center type urban feel features in this node. So it's pretty interesting. They have multifamily and a mix of uses in townhomes in here, and I think the typology is similar to what we're kind of showing here. So if you can see that on Google Maps, or just if you're able to drive there, that might be a good example to see.
I was going to add one more example. Memorial Drive in the city of Atlanta, coming from downtown and going east, 4-lane roadway, divided, and there's a lot of and it's new too. So it's been recently done in the past few years. Lots of larger scale development, but it's still, thinking about the human scale with sidewalks and things like that. I think that'd be also a good example.
Yeah, Michael, I know that one well since it's where my neighborhood. It does because that's Cabbage Town too. Some of those areas around town, it does step back very well and blend in with existing people. So, and when you walk it, certainly you feel like they have very wide sidewalks. You feel very comfortable. very good streetscapes and those development types, and it feels a very smooth transition between the two. And they use topography to their advantage, to be honest, too. So they're smart about kind of how they scale that out and build it out. So the devil's in the details.
Jonathan, I think that would be a question for you.
Yeah, I think they're in 2 different locations, if I'm not mistaken, Jonathan.
They are in 2 different locations.
Yeah.
This is much further south.
Downtown Smyrna, and which is off, not near the highway.
That's right.
Well, so Scott, it's always certain to keep in mind what happens long term, right? Creating visions that are flexible enough to accommodate future development, whatever that may hold. So, point well taken. Thank you.
I think this last question is a little bit broader, but we can still kind of make a broad, a likewise broad, just opine some thoughts. Angie, you probably can speak to this maybe a little bit better than I can, just because of your design background. But generally from my perspective, when we have roadways that we're having safety issues on, especially if it's speeding oriented. I know we're referencing DOIs here, but if we have people who are basically not using the roadway as intended, sometimes that's a design issue, and there are design features that can help slow down the traffic, or whether it's well, Andrew, I'll let you can speak to that better than I can. But
I will say I think they're related but not connected directly. I mean, there are people who drive through low-lying urban streets who have DUIs and speed. I mean, I think but to the degree that you have Old Alabama, so you have typically wider roads. Holcomb Bridge is another one. It's a wide road. To the degree that you can frame the road well. When you have vegetated medians, you have strong edges. It helps control traffic versus kind of a wide open highway feel. You have it also designed so there's not super blocks, so you have a series of intersections, so you don't speed up and slow down. That's harder to do that in those environments. The introduction of slower traffic speeds. A Vision Zero campaign to lower deaths is one approach that many cities have done. Introduction of roundabouts. Now, again, roundabouts are not the solution to all things, but a series of them and creating expectation of what needs to happen. And ultimately, good development. If there's nothing to look at, there's nothing kind of framing the street, then you're not gonna pay as much attention, right? If there's something happening there's activity going on, there's more eyes on the street. It's all part of that. So there's a series of tools that all make a better place, a better. So it's also about making Alabama slower, but also making it a better place that can improve that opportunity, that feel, that character. I mean, I think that goes back to, I don't have an answer for that. I don't know if even Eric does. I think that's a real question for the city of Roswell to look at the design. I would direct it to Public Works Director.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as part of those, as part of the work on those, presumably some traffic forecasting was done. That doesn't mean that's exactly what it is, but there's definitely some expectation of what the diversion effects will be with some of these new facilities. And, I guess I'll just add, while the specificity, you would need to reach out to Roswell DOT to get any type of answers along those lines. But, broadly speaking, as this question sort of suggests, all these new facilities that are coming in, Big Creek Parkway, express lanes, the express lane bridge on the south side, these are all things that will work together to, hopefully start helping help to relieve a lot of the stress at the interchange itself.
I think we've answered this before, but yeah, it's, economic development is tied to, recreating. I mean, this node, we're looking at this comprehensively. So it's about deterring crime, but it's also about redevelopment. It's all about creating real sustainable economic development as part of this. And that goes for both sides of the interstate, which we'll be talking about next week. Same idea, same content, same intent. So, yeah.
All right, well, looks like we went through all the questions. If any others pop up, we'll certainly be happy to answer them. We do have a little bit of time left, and we do have a little bit of wrap up we want to do. But with the time we have, I think we can potentially have a little bit more conversation about what the vision for this is. So we've articulated a little bit of a vision that tries to balance some of the things that we've already heard. We certainly heard from some just now that they would like to see something a little bit more, at least the way I'm interpreting it, feels like this is maybe a little bit modest. So I'd love to hear from this group, when you're looking at the vision that we've created for either of these nodes, if there are things that you think that we should consider adding, consider removing. We're all ears. That's the point of this whole conversation.
Eric, do you want to address this question that just popped up?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, we can address that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the properties in this quadrant have been there for ages, seem to be quite profitable. Why would anyone redevelop? I think there's no reason. Owned and profitable. How can we change? That is a great question. Yeah, so something that we didn't put in this presentation for this evening in the purposes of being succinct, but we did talk about in our lunch session is well, the challenges that you're kind of speaking to. Redevelopment is not the obvious thing to do, right? If you're a property owner, if you're managing an apartment complex or a shopping center, even those that may look not so great on the outside, they're probably making money. So what it often means is that we have to find ways to incentivize redevelopment, right? There's something that's generally referred to as the rule of three, which is redevelopment becomes viable when the person making the investment in that redevelopment can make 3 times back their investment. So a lot of it comes down to expressing that possibility, number one, and that's why I think in a lot of these examples, well, we're trying to thread the needle, so to speak, but we can't replace. We know, especially with this node here at 400, we're going to need to come back to this a little bit in particular, because we know there's some differences of opinion about what the level of intensity should be, and making sure to take Trent's perspective, for instance, that we're capitalizing as best as we can on the opportunity here. While I think other opinions have kind of voiced the idea of being a little bit more modest. But again, we're not doing this in a vacuum. We'll be talking about the node at Old Alabama next week as well. So as we go through what we've done tonight, and then also what we do next Thursday, we'll be revising and refining the concepts based on your feedback, and we'll be drafting some plans that are a little bit more formalized and frameworked out than what we've shared with you tonight. Again, what we've shared with you tonight is the product of a few hours of work since our morning lunchtime session. So we want to take that, we want to build it a little bit, take into consideration some of the things we heard this evening as well. What our plans are, we're going to do, hopefully all of you, I presume most of you, you're engaged with the community, so you had the opportunity to participate in our virtual community open house that we had back over the late summer. We're going to do sort of another version of that. And there's going to be elements of that focus on these nodes and these draft sub-area plans. So we'll have mechanisms to get feedback from everyone through that virtual open house, where you'll be able to see more formalized versions of what we're going to put together based on the feedback, and you'll be able to provide further insights on what you like and what you potentially don't like, and what we may need to refine a little bit further. And then of course, once we do that, we want to fold this into the comprehensive plan. That's the whole point. So, things that are on the table is thinking about how we may need to refine, the character areas at these nodes, and how we may need to speak to some more specificity to make sure that the vision that we've laid out with you is something that is achievable from a regulatory standpoint of view. So I think that's basically what we have in terms of our program. But like I said, we still got about 15 minutes. We purposely wanted to be a little aggressive on time, so we did have opportunity to have more conversation if need be, and then also to just be respectful of your time, because we know it's we're doing this in the evening, so we know everyone's got dinner and family things that they probably want to be doing too. So we'll stay on for another 15 minutes for anyone who'd like to have any additional conversation with us. If not, we really appreciate you joining in tonight, and hopefully we'll see you next Thursday as well.
I just had one comment. If Trent could speak a little bit more to what he was talking about as far as commercial opportunity at 400, at that 400 node. Can you be a little bit more specific, Trent?
Do you really want to hear it? Could I make a suggestion? I have spent, and respectfully, I've lived here for a long time, and I've also gotten very involved in the last several years after I sold my business. I had a wonderful experience in 2019 serving on the East Roswell Economic Action Committee. And that committee was formulated by the mayor and council to do exactly what we're talking about here now, and that is to study the east side of Roswell, east of Warsaw Road, with particular emphasis on Holcomb Bridge corridor. And so, and if you want to read our report, I did the report in January of this year. It's on the website, the city website, under the East Roswell Economic Action Committee. And I'm not trying to toot our horn, but we did a lot of work, and we uncovered a lot of statistics, and we went back to 2005 and went through all the economic studies, at least I did, which we all tried to get through them all, but since then, that addressed the City of Roswell economic development needs in a universal standpoint, but also touched a lot on the east side issues, especially the nodes all the way to the Nesbitt Ferry area, and some of the character issues that are presently within the comp plan. And it's only a 15-page report, but I do think it reiterates a lot of the issues that have been talked about in the city of Roswell for at least 15 years. There's a lot of similarity between those reports throughout those years and the needs, especially when it comes to the east side of Roswell. And it would be a good brief read. Again, not tooting our horns, but there were 9 of us that put a lot of time and a year into doing that research. And a lot of what we're talking about now scratches the surface, but there's some statistics in there and so forth that I think represents, and the committee in the whole committee, and we had Roswell Inc., and we had some city representatives, community development involved in the effort also to help us work our way through these issues. It's a good read. And I think it's eye-opening, especially when it comes to the Holcomb Bridge node, the entire interchange, and it goes beyond the Holcomb Bridge 400, and it goes into the Centennial node, and then it goes into what they've called the Nesbitt Ferry node. I think it's a good read, and I think it lays the foundation for a lot of what the city needs to have done. We presented that report to the city I guess it was late January of this year. It was well received, except we did a public forum in the community building on Eastside Roswell Park, and we did a city council presentation. It's well received, but much of it has not become actionable yet. And of course, it takes time, but I think this is a very good opportunity for them right here in this particular process, even though it may not go as deeply as what we could go into, especially the nodes of this node here and the Centennial node. But it might be worth reading and worth some conversation maybe next Friday, just on some of the factual presentations in that study and some of the recommendations. We've got a whole set of recommendations in there that I touched on this morning and just briefly. But I think it's a good read and it's good for the East Side. So I'll be quiet now.
Yeah, thank you, Trent. We'll absolutely, from the planning team side, we'll make sure to familiarize ourselves with that. So
that's your call. I'm not trying to toot our horn. We just the committee did a lot of work, and I think it's very valuable. And again, having been a resident here for 33 years in the Willow Springs subdivision, I think it's good information, and it's a good stepping stone.
Sure, certainly.
Thank you for tolerating me.
Any other thoughts or anything that anyone would like to share before we break? All right. Well, I guess we do have one slide, one more slide, admittedly, which is just, we've talked about it already, but next Thursday, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the old Alabama Road node, so just east of where we've been looking at this evening. So it's going to be a very similar program to what you've seen today. For those of you who are able to join during lunchtime, from 12 to 1, we'll be having some broad conversation just to kind of understand what we think the vision could be. And then from 6 to 7:30, ending a little bit earlier than tonight, we'll be presenting some immediate ideas that we've come up with based on the conversation we had earlier in the day. So, if you haven't already signed up and you're interested, in the same way that you signed up for this, please email Jonathan at CORONAJ@ponco.com to register. We really appreciate everyone's time. And like I said, we hope we'll see some of you next Thursday.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.